Hi, I'm Trish and welcome to the sew along for the Molly. The fabric I'm sewing in today is going to be a sweatshirting fleece. This has only minimal stretch, probably a little bit more than minimal, I'd say 20 to 25. I do recommend 30% plus horizontal stretch. Entirely up to you though, it certainly will come out fine with a sweatshirting fleece. I am using a French terry in view A as the upper front yoke area. So I'm sewing today mainly with my overlocker, my serger. You don't have to use a serger to sew my patterns. You can just use a regular sewing machine with one of the recommended stitches. A zigzag or a lightning bolt works well. The other thing you're going to need is a plain sewing machine with a straight stitch to sew the pocket on with, and the hem on the sleeve if you want to do view B. So you could either use one of the decorative hemming stitches on your machine, or you could use a twin needle or a cover stitch. So the other thing you need to know is that because we're sewing with a knit fabric, you will need a jersey or a stretch needle in your machine to stop any runs or ladders in your fabric. The last thing we need to know is our seam allowances are mainly 6mm, which is 1/4 inch. We will be using some 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowances, but the majority of them are 6mm. So when you're ready, set your overlocker up with 4 threads of colour that match your fabric, and let's get started. I'm going to start with the pocket. Here is my pocket piece, and this curve edge here is the hand opening. So what you're going to need is take one of the hand opening pieces, and they're rectangles with notches in the middle, and we're going to fold them wrong sides together. And when you have that folded wrong sides together, match the notch there to the notch in the center of that hand opening area, and then hold it together with a pin or a clip, however you prefer. And when you are pinning, if you're using pins, make sure they're ball pins and you pin within the seam allowance of 6mm, 1/4 inch. So all that we're going to do now is match all 3 of these raw edges, and we're going to sew that on. So this is what we're looking for, like this. So when you've done this side, go ahead and repeat for the other side. And the other thing I should have mentioned is when we overlock stitch, we serge this, we don't want to cut any fabric off. We're just going to serge right on the very edge. So that blade is just designed to trim off any spare threads or any fraying. So once you've reached this point here, go to your iron and give that a press, and while you're there, press this top seam under by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and at the same time press these sides under by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. So let's get the pocket placed in the correct position. Take your lower front and place it right side up. Take your pocket and place it on top, right side up. So we have wrong side to right side. The first thing we're going to do is locate the notch positions along the hemline. There's a notch in the center of the lower pocket, and that matches to the hem notch on the front lower of the garment. So match those together and pin them into place. On one side where we folded that edge of the pocket, that will match to the notch on the hemline here. Pin that into place. And on the other side, the same thing, the edge of the fold matches to that notch position there. Now for the upper part of the pocket. Our drill holes are our placement positions, and they are marked at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. So what that means is we've folded in our upper edge by 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. So you have to guess a position the same distance in and out from the edge here, like so. And when you have that position there, pop a pin in it, and the head of the pin will go directly through the drill hole that you marked on the lower front piece. And that is the position for our pocket there. And we just keep doing that around the other 4 placement marks. Turn under that 1 centimetre, find a position 1 centimetre in and 1 centimetre down, and then match that to your marked position. And just keep doing that. Now, one thing about working with knits is they notoriously stretch out of place, and in addition to that, sometimes your marks can become moved as you mark them and cut your fabric out. So the hard and fast rule is there isn't one. What you need to do now is you have the general position for your pocket to be sewn in. What you need to do now is just rearrange this pocket until you are comfortable that it is in the place you want it to be. You don't want any obvious bumps, but if you need to just change the position of these pins, just go ahead and do it now. Knits always stretch out of place, and as long as our drill holes are covered, they're in a perfect world, they're our perfect placement position, but the reality is that sometimes things move. Alright, so when we have this into place, make sure that 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance at the top is turned under. And what we're going to do is start off by sewing the top edge here. So what I'm going to do is just lengthen my stitch length from normal, and I do have a ball needle here, and I'm going to make sure I back tack when I begin and end this. And I'm also going to sew an edge stitch, which means it's just in from the edge. It's about 1 mil, so maybe 1/16 of an inch. And don't forget to test stitch the spare fabric before you begin. Now, because this pocket is going to be under quite a bit of pressure, you can put a phone or a hand in here. I'm going to sew a second row of stitching parallel to the first. Alrighty. So when you've done the top, now we're going to do the sides. Now, because this is a straight piece, you can see how that's sort of bobbling out. I'm going to press that into place afterwards. It will settle down. In a perfect world, I should have used ribbing for that, but that's fine. So when you're ready, and you might need to rearrange your pins again here, just sew those sides into place exactly the same way. Now, in a perfect world, this should be a straight line. On my previous samples it was, but what I'm finding is the sweatshirting is making it push out, and I'm happy to just sew that on an angle and work with the fabric than against it. But in a perfect world, this should be a straight seam and it should be parallel to the side seam. What I'm going to do now is do exactly the same thing on the other side, just so I have consistency. So this one is angling out for me, but for you it should be straight. Right, so what I'm going to do now is give this a further press into place just to set that in the correct position. The other thing you might like to do, you don't have to, but I'm just going to very quickly tack stitch this together just at the center. This is where we'll attach the band later, and I just don't want that shifting. So let's sew the shoulders. You're going to need the yoke pieces and the back. So here is the back and here is the neck edge, and there's double notches in the center of the back neck. And this is the view A, the hood yoke piece. We have two of them, a pair. One's been cut out like this and one's been cut out like this. So they're a mirror. We're going to place these pieces right side together to the back, and we want to make sure the curve of the neck edge is in the center. So this one goes on like this, and this one will go on like this. And when you have that in the correct place, we're just going to overlock that shoulder together. So now go across to the other side and overlock the other shoulder into place. Now let's work on the hood for view A. Place the hood pieces right sides together, and part way around the curve you'll see double notches. We want to overlock this long curved edge together. Now we're going to sew this hood into the neckline of the garment. So take the piece that you just created earlier with the yoke and place it right side up. Take the hood and place it right side down so we have right sides together. So what we're looking for now is the neck edge of the hood. So we have this straight edge of the yoke, and you want to place it right sides together to the straight edge of the hood. And you'll know you've got the right area because just in from the edge there's a notch here, so we want these two notches to match. So what we're going to be doing is overlocking this all the way through. So pin that together at the notch. You will also find another notch on the hood that matches to the shoulder seam, and make sure when you do overlock that in that that seam faces towards the back. Then as we go around, the seam on the hood will match the centre back neck, so we want that seam to be in the very centre of the double notches. And then everything in reverse. There'll be another notch here for the other shoulder, And then as we come back to the other side front, there'll be another notch here, and we want those front edges to match. Now I'm going to overlock it from this side simply because my French terry yoke is lighter. It does not matter which side you sew it from, as long as your 6mm lines match. So when you're ready, just serge that into place. Next, what we want to do is finish this raw edge off. So what I'm going to do is just serge a line from here all the way through the straight edge to the same position on the other side, just on the raw edge to tidy that up. If you wanted to, and you were only using a home sewing machine, you could just press this under. There's no real need to serge it. So now we're going to go back to our iron and press a hem through the neck into place. You'll notice at the 3cm mark there's a notch, and that is our turn position. So when you go to your iron, just go and find those notches. There's one here, and that will just help you with the width. So what we're going to do is press this under like so, all the way from one side to the other. So now we've pressed our hem for our hood and our front into place here. We need to secure it. So you can stitch through the overlocking line. And we're going to stitch from one side all the way through to the other. If you prefer, you could twin needle this. So I'm going to sew a second row of stitching parallel to the first. So once you've reached this position here, it's a good idea to give your work another press, but what we need to do is just secure this into place. So what I'm going to do is put the right side as if I'm wearing it over the top of the left side as if I'm wearing it, and I'm just going to match this into place at the bottom. So what I'm doing is just making sure the edge of the fold of the placket, and there's a notch there, matches the edge of the overlocking line. So the plackets should sit on top of each other just like that, and in a perfect world it needs to be right over left, although it really doesn't matter. And when you have that in the correct position, we're just going to tack stitch that into place. And all that means is we're going to just sew a very short line of stitches within the seam allowance of 6mm, 1/4 inch, just so that doesn't budge, like so. So you're going to need a 7-inch 18cm zip. I'm using a dress zip. You can use a chunky zip if you want. Whichever zip you choose, you just need to make sure when you sew it that there will be a 1 3/8 of an inch gap in the middle. Because it's a knit fabric, probably won't matter if you end up with that. The reason I'm saying that is dress zips from side to side are 2.5 centimeters, which is an inch, and chunky zips are usually 3 centimeters wide to wide. I'll have to work side to side. I'll have to work that out. I'll pop the conversion down below. Okay, so you're going to need that zip. In addition to that, you're going to need some fusible interfacing, and make sure you choose one that's appropriate for the fabric. You can get a stretch fuse, a knit fabric fuse. And the next question is, which side do you apply the fuse to? Well, obviously you apply it to the back of the fabric, but the collar has two sides, an outside and an inside. And the general rule of thumb is you put the fuse on the side that's going to be seen, so on the outside. Because this is a zip up and the collar may be worn open or closed, it really doesn't matter which side you put it on. I'm going to have this cargo on the outside and the black on the inside, so I've applied my fuse to the cargo. Okay, so let's get started on sewing this. So you're at the stage that you've sewn the shoulder together, and what we're going to do is take the piece that you want. You might choose to do exactly the same colour both sides, whatever you want to do. So we're going to sew this collar piece together. As we look around the collar, the outside curve has notches at various placements. So we have a notch to match to our shoulder, a notch in the centre back, and then a notch for the other shoulder, and clearly this point needs to match to the beginning. So we're sewing the outside curve like so. You can choose to overlock this if you want. I'm going to use my plain machine. So depending on how flexible your fuse is, you may find this is really easy, you may find it a little bit more challenging. So I'm just going to start off by matching this, and we are sewing at 6mm, 1/4 inch. Now, I normally wouldn't say this, you can get away with sewing this at 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch if you want. The reason for this is when we sew the under collar and you'll have a little bit more manoeuvrability. But I have actually patterned it for 6mm, 1/4 inch. So all you need to do now, and you will find it easier on a plain sewing machine using your zigzag or your lightning bolt stitch, is to match those points and start sewing. And we want the seam at the shoulder to face the back of the garment. So all I'm doing is matching the notch point at the shoulder, and I'm going to make that fit the neckline underneath. And you can see I'm trying to make it into as much of a straight line as I can. And the fabric I'm sewing this in is a little bit stretchier than I normally sew it. I haven't sewn it for a long time. It's a polar fleece. It's a thin polar fleece. They call it micro fleece. It just feels beautifully. It's warm and snuggly. It feels a bit like squish or cuddle fur. And then find your centre notch, which is here, and match that centre notch to the centre of the back notches. And then everything in reverse, match the next notch. Want that seam facing to the back. And then back to the starting position. So this is where we're going to insert our zip, like so. What I need to tell you now is that I am not going to overlock finish this edge here. You could if you wanted to. The reason I'm not going to is because I have patterned this with a 6mm seam allowance. This, if it's done correctly, is going to be hidden underneath here anyway. You're not going to see it. So if you want to, you can now overlock secure that raw edge there. Knits don't fray. If you are concerned at all, certainly go ahead and tidy up that raw edge. So take your zip, and now I'm working on the right side as if you wear it. Take your zip and place it right sides down, and place this in the correct place and open it up, because you'll find it a little bit easier to start. Now you may or may not need to change your zip out for a zipper foot. It really depends on how much width you've got with your machine foot. When we stitch the zipper, so I've placed the zipper face down, so we have right sides together, and I've placed the far side of the zip on it here. When we do stitch this in, we want to make sure the seam here faces up into the collar. That's really important for tidiness later on. And we also want to make sure that you leave at least 6mm, 1/4 inch at the top, if not 1 centimetre. Now you will find this fabric can stretch out a bit, simply because it's a knit, so just make sure that works. So what I'm going to do is leave, just because of the stretch, leave about 1 centimetre at the top, which is 3/8 of an inch. And now I'm going to sew that into place with a 6mm seam allowance. Now if you're using a lightning bolt stitch or a zigzag stitch, you'll find this really straightforward to do. And make sure that seam is facing up into the collar. And the reason I can do it like this is because my zipper foot has 6mm, 1/4 of an inch from side to the centre. Now because I've got the zip in the way, I'm going to leave the needle down in my work. I'm going to lift my presser foot and just zip that zip up past the end. And because of the stretch of my fabric, I've got around about 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch left below the bottom stopper. I'm going to go to there and back tack to finish. So here is what we're looking for, like this. Now the fun begins. We have to match the other side exactly. If you want to, you could pop a pin here so you know exactly where the join's going to be, like so. Oh, that one seems to be a bit blunt. Oh no, I'm just trying to put it through the plastic. So that is my exact point there. So when this is zipped up, I want my seams to match like so. So what I'm going to do is get the other side of my collar, and I'm going to place it down like that. I'm just going to turn my work over. Where I put this pin is exactly where I want that seam to be there. So what I'm going to do is open up that zip again. I'm going to repin that there, making sure that seam faces up. And that's on the edge. Right, so I'm going to do the same thing but from the bottom up. I am just going to make sure that the zipper extends the same amount on one side as the other, and I'll just hold that in place with a back tack. It just gives me a bit of extra space to readjust, and I will zip that zipper up past my join position, making sure that seam faces up. I'm going to stitch that side into place. And I'm going to stop with the needle down, and I'm going to open that zipper up again, and I'm just going to make sure that the zipper extends the same amount on the other side, and continue stitching. when we turn that over, this is what we want to see. We want a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch gap from side to side. Slightly more won't make a difference. It's just really so it's easy to zip this open and shut. And as you can tell, my seams here are now lined up perfectly, and we have a small amount at the bottom. Here is my undercollar piece. Now I'm going to come to this outside curved edge and go to my iron and press this under 6mm, 1/4 inch, or whatever seam you sewed that on at. So it can be between 6mm and 1 centimetre. It won't really make a huge difference. So go ahead and press that into place. So here I have this pressed up. Come to the front and open up that zip again. What we're going to do is we are going to sew this into place like so. I'm going to start off by making sure that folded edge is right on the seam here, and I'm going to match that to the top. And then what I'm going to do is stitch exactly the same width we stitched before, so 6mm, 1/4 inch. And making sure that matches, do the same thing on the other side. Now locate the notch at the centre back neck, and we're going to make sure we sew this together, matching the notch on the underlayer to the undercollar to the match on the outer collar. Now the only thing about this is you want to really make sure it doesn't stretch, and you may have small issues because of your fuse, but just take your time and sew those two together. So we're going to sew this at 6mm, 1/4 inch as well. Now you shouldn't need to, but if you want to, you can clip the corners just to reduce the bulk. You're just making a small angle from side to side, and you want to make sure you leave about 2mm gap there between the corner turn. So that's maybe 1/8 of an inch. I won't worry about it on the other side. So when you're ready, turn that collar through. So now we're going to stitch the collar into place. We're going to use a standard stitch in the ditch like you would on a skirt waistband. So find the centre back notch, and you have folded that up, and match that to the double notches at the back of the garment, and hold that into place with a pin. Now I always pin from the back and then I readjust from the front. And then you'll also have a notch here, which is the one that matches to the shoulder. So if you've got stray threads like that, just trim them off to about 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres, and make sure everything, all that seam is folded up into the collar, and then pin that into place. When you've pinned this and you're comfortable that everything's in the right place, we're effectively going to stitch in the ditch, which means stitch through this line of stitching here. Some people prefer to do it from this side Some people prefer to do it from this side. I'm going to sew it from the inside. Entirely up to you, whatever you want to do. Mainly I just think I can have a little bit more control over it. So the idea is this folded edge wants to sit just over that line of stitching, and when we stitch, we want to stitch on the line of stitching underneath. Now with knit fabrics, you'll find it's really forgiving. If you're close enough, the stitches will just fall into that seam and you won't see them. So the main thing is to take your time and just be very careful that you're stitching on the line underneath and that everything is pushed up into the collar, because when this is open you may see it and you want it to look really tidy. So I'm just creating an edge stitch here. And the hardest thing is usually the beginning, just getting started. Okay, and once you've done that, the rest should be relatively straightforward. So I'm going to put some top stitching around the collar as well. I'm just going to run a line up, around and back to the same position on the other side. You can do this at whatever width you like. Normally I would do this so the bulk of my work's on the other side, but that's working out fine. So all I'm doing is just flattening the collar, making sure that folds all the way on the top edge and stitching it through. When you attach the lower front, we're going to do it exactly the same as the other view. You want to put right sides together. There'll be a centre notch to match to the centre of the zip, and then there will be notches on either side. Now we're going to put the lower front right side together to the upper front. So what that means is, here is the lower front piece we created earlier with the pocket's optional, and in the very centre of this piece there is a notch. Now that notch matches to a notch here on this folded opening here. So that position matches like so. Part way across you'll see another notch to match. And that's the same on both sides. So starting at the arm side, overlock the front yoke, so the upper front to the lower front. Now we're working on the sleeves. We have two sleeves that are cut exactly the same. They're cut on the fold, and in the centre of them you'll find a small notch. So that notch there is going to sew to the shoulder seam on the body of our garment. So take the garment and place it right side up, and then take one of the sleeves, and it doesn't matter which one, and place it right side down so we have right side together, and match that notch in the centre of the sleeve to the shoulder seam. And now we're going to overlock that into place, right through from one side to the other. Now as you serge this in, the yoke seam should face towards the hemline, and the shoulder seam should face towards the back. So once you've done the sleeve on one side, go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Now we're going to sew the side seams and the underarm all at once. So fold your garment at the wrist so we have right sides together, and then just follow that all the way down. So overlock that together on one side, and then when you've done it on one side, complete it on the other side. You might find it easy when you get to this underarm point to make sure these seams face in opposite directions, just to reduce some of the bulk. Let's work on the waistband. So the waistband is a long rectangular piece, and we're going to fold it right sides together and serge or overlock together this short edge. Now the edge we've just overlocked together is going to become the left hand side seam. It doesn't matter if you put it on the right hand side seam, and that's as you're wearing it, but generally the seam will go to the left. And then we're going to fold this band again so that we have wrong sides together. So what I'm going to do is just pin that at the seam line, and directly opposite that you'll notice there's a notch. So this is going to become the right hand seam, side seam. And at the centre point of both of them there's another notch. That is the centre front and the centre back. So let's place the band in the correct position at the hemline of the garment. Take your garment, and I always find it easier if you turn it inside out, with the back at the back and the front at the front. So this here on this side is going to be the left hand side seam. So I'm just going to mark that with a pin. Take your band and at the side of the seam, place that inside the hemline and match up those 3 points there. So we want all the seams together. Now come to the point directly opposite, and that is the other side seam, and match that together. And the parts in the centre will match to a notch in the centre of the garment. And that will match at the back. And it will match at the front. And if you remember at the front, we ran a small line of tack stitching to hold it into place. So what we need to do now is sew that together with our overlocker, and you'll need to stretch that to fit because this band is reduced in size just to allow for a snugger fit. So I'm going to start from the left hand side seam position, but I'm not actually going to start on the seam. Because it'll be too bulky, I'm just going to start one side or other of it. And I'm just going to be very careful, especially because this is a bit thicker than French terry or a hatchie or something like that. I'm just going to be very careful when I go over those seams, making sure they're facing in different directions just to reduce the bulk. And I need to make sure I sew through all 3 layers. So once I've started that off, what we need to do is distribute the stretch between those notch positions. Now as you go through the front, you're going to have 4 layers to sew through if you're sewing the view with the pocket. So just be very careful you're catching everything. What I like to do is just sew a few stitches when I start, just because it works like another pair of hands for me, and it just helps hold that into place. So just gently ease that out and sew it together. For the band with the elastic in it, what we're going to do is fold this long rectangle band right side together, and we're going to overlock together this short end. So let's sort out the elastic for view B. So with the elastic, I've put a suggested cut length on the information sheet. What you can do is check this by going to that information sheet and finding the front length, shoulder neck point to hem for your size, and then at that point take the elastic and place that around your hip area or leg, wherever that falls on you, and adjust that to suit. So when you, and it will depend on the stretch of your elastic too, and the look you want. So when you're ready, making sure you don't have any twists in this elastic, is place the ends over the top of each other. And I've done this by about 1.5 centimetres, which is 9/16 of an inch. And I'm just going to stitch this down flat. Now you can certainly use a zigzag stitch if you prefer. So next, take your band, and we want to fold this so it is wrong sides together, right side out. And I'm going to place the elastic inside this band like so. Because this is going to make it more awkward to sew on, what I'm going to do is tack stitch the raw edges of my band together. I want to make sure I don't catch the overlocking here. Now, you don't have to sew on your band in this method. You can do the traditional way, which is just to stitch it on, then leave a gap and thread your elastic through afterwards. Perfectly able to do that if you want to. But what I'm going to do is just tack stitch those edges together and then overlock this into my garment. And I'm literally just stitching very close to the edge. Sewing on this band is exactly the same for view A. This seam here matches to the left hand side, the seam opposite matches to the right hand side, and then there's notches in the centre to match as well. So what I've done is I've matched the side seams and the centre notches to my band and on my garment, and I'm going to overlock this into place, and when I do I'm just going to make sure that that elastic is pushed out the way and I don't catch that. So now we need to sew our sleeve hems. The sleeve hem allowance is 1.5 centimetres, which is 9/16 of an inch, and you'll see a small notch to show you the turn position. So what you need to do now is go to your twin needle and turn that up 1.5 centimetres, 9/16 of an inch, or your cover seamer, and stitch that into position. I'm going to run a line of overlocking and then finish it off with my plain machine stitch. And don't forget, when you've done it on one side, to go ahead and repeat it on the other side as well. To sew the cuffs, take the cuff piece and fold it. See the notch here? We want to make sure that notch is on the fold top and bottom. And when you've done that, we are going to overlock together this edge here. So now put your hand inside and just turn that back on itself so that we have right side out or wrong side together. And then just rearrange that so that the seams are on top of each other and the notches directly opposite are on top of each other as well. And then just repeat that for the other cuff. To sew the cuff into place, come to the wrist area of the sleeve, and this is wrong side out, and then take one of the cuffs and place it inside. Now what we want to do is make sure all the seams are on top of each other, and then all the notches are on top of each other on the other side. Now we're going to overlock those 3 layers together, gently stretching to fit. Now it's a good idea to not start from the seam side, and when you do sew over the seam, make sure everything is facing in different directions just to reduce the bulk of that and to stop your overlocking your blade, your needles from snapping is what I'm trying to say. The other thing is, because you need to stretch this to fit, just take your time, and you might find it easier to sew with the cuff inside. Thanks for joining me with the sew along. I hope you enjoy your garment, and thank you very much for buying my sewing patterns. If you like what you see and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. And if you're into Facebook, don't forget to jump over to my Facebook group and you can join the community of other sewists and see other people's makes with my patterns. So I hope to see you again soon.